Well, it's good to be able to have a chance to stand before you this evening. I appreciate Brother Antonio for letting me get up here, and Brother Lundy for stepping aside for a little bit. Let me try my hand at this. So it's a good jumping off point, right? To be able to sit down with some good friends that I know and love, and be able to practice what I think I will probably need to do at some point someday. So, all of us, I'm going to talk about something that we all mostly know about. Ever heard of a guy named David?
Yeah.
So we all know about David mostly because, he's the man after God's own heart. The Bible speaks more about David than it does almost any other man in the Bible, save probably Jesus, in terms of pages in the Bible. You hear a whole lot about David's life. And in fact, it even says that he went fully after God. He's called a man after God's own heart, like I said, in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 14. And then later on, David's always the one that God compares kings to. He's the gold standard. In fact, at some point it says in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse about 12, it said that even when Solomon messed up, Solomon was doing bad, God says, because of what you're doing, I'm going to take the kingdom away, I'm going to break it up. But you know what? Because of your father's sake, I'm not going to do it while you're in power. I'm going to wait until your son comes up. That's power, right? That is a man who not only did God say he's a man after God's own heart, not only is there more space devoted in the Bible to him than almost any other man, but his life was good enough that it had an influence even on his kids, on the way God dealt with his children, on the way God punished his children. In fact, it goes as far to say that many of the later kings, he was described as a gold standard. It's amazing. Yet despite all that, you got to ask why. I mean, if any of you know much about the story of David, he was a bad dude. A bad dude. We like to focus on all these good things, but he did some pretty rough stuff. Let's look back. Just the first one that always pops in mind is the story of Bathsheba, right? Oh, we all know it. He committed adultery, and you're not supposed to do that. But there's more to it than that. It wasn't just the fact that he committed adultery that made it so terrible. It was the way he did it. He killed her husband to try to cover it up. And he didn't just kill her husband. It wasn't just like his husband was anybody. We always talk about Uriah the Hittite. It's like, oh, that's Bathsheba's husband. David killed him so he could have his wife, Uriah's wife. So there's more to it than that. Uriah just wasn't some guy that he met on the street. Uriah was far more than that. Uriah was one of his right-hand men. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, right? Uriah, if you look a little bit further back, let's go back over in 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 10 through 47. You see something. It talks about David's mighty men. David's mighty men. There was 3 mighty men, and then there was 30 even more mighty men. Right? So what the mighty men were, if you read through 1 Chronicles in this particular chapter, in chapter 11, and you read a little bit more in the context as you go through there, find out that the mighty men was an elite fighting force that David had put together. Some of his best warriors who he sent on special missions and who did great things for him. Essentially, this was almost, if I understand it correctly, because I read through Chronicles 11 here, is almost like winning the Congressional Medal of Honor, right? You are a really good guy. I'm going to honor you in this way. I'm going to put you on this elite fighting force because you have done some great stuff for me. I owe you. And you see, if you look a little bit further down in verse 41, who's on there? It talks about Uriah the Hittite as one of David's mighty men. So this just wasn't some guy. David knew this guy. And David knew him well enough to put on his 30 men fighting elite special fighting force. David owed this guy for doing something for him. So when not only did he cheat, and not only did he commit adultery, but he committed adultery with one of his best men's wives. A guy who he owed a lot to. More than that, he had the guy killed. Not only was Uriah a guy who David owed a lot to, one of his big right-hand men, he was also a good guy. Let's look over a little bit in 1 Samuel chapter 11. I'm going to read a little bit right here. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses about 6 through 13. Now let me set the stage a little bit right here. What has happened is David has already committed adultery with Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. And now he's trying to cover it up. So the first thing he tries to do and the reason he's trying to cover it up, he would just let it sweep under the rug, but Bathsheba turns up pregnant. So especially since at this particular time, her husband is off at war. Yeah. That's the reason he cheated on him. Let's stop for a second and look at that. Uriah is off doing work for David, and David's got the gall to take while he is gone away doing work for David, being loyal to him, he's got the gall to turn around and mess around with his wife.
That's right.
So once Bathsheba turns up pregnant, David now he's like, uh-oh, Uriah's been away at war for a long time. Someone's going to know something happened here. There's no way I can cover this up. Yeah. So what's he try to do? He brings Uriah back. We're going to read 1 Samuel chapter 11. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verses 6 through 13. 2 Samuel, pardon me. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verses 6 through 13 say, So David sent this word to Joab, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was doing, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, Go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. When David was told Uriah did not go home, he asked him, Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home? Then Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped in open fields. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Then it goes on a little bit further. Right after that, David tries to get the man drunk, so he'll go do it anyway, but he doesn't. Even when he's stone cold drunk, he still goes and sleeps with his servants because of what he said right here. Look at what he says in verse 11. He says, Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped in open fields. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Uriah is being better than David was right here.
Yeah.
Not only, whenever David sent men off to war, in this particular time, it says in the beginning of chapter 11 that David stayed back home.
Yeah.
David stayed back home. He said, hold down the fort. Okay, you guys go off. I'll just sit there and eat my good wine and food and grapes and all this other sort of stuff. I'll stay with my wife and my family and everybody. And guess what? I'll mess around with your wives too.
All right, come on.
And even after hearing Uriah be such a good, upstanding man in this situation, David still keeps on going.
Yeah.
Well, not long after this, he has Uriah sent back to the front and he says, Joab, what I want you to do, I know how to get rid of this guy. I know how to clean up this problem.
Yeah.
Have Joab, if he's not going to go in and be the father of this child, then I'll figure out a legal way so I can be the father of this child. So what he does, he has Joab send Uriah out in front. Lead the charge. And Uriah's like, yes, he's a good guy. He's like, I'm going to do what's right for my master David. He goes out, he leads the charge, and David tells Joab, whenever he leads that charge, I want you to pull all the men back. So he's running into battle by himself, and I'll let the Ammonites kill the man for me. So he does that, and Uriah dies. So let's review the facts real quick. This David guy, and he's got the gall to not be a good king and lead his men into battle. He stays home. Furthermore, he commits adultery, not adultery with just any woman, but with the wife of one of his good servants.
Yeah.
Good servant that he owes a lot to, because this is one of the guys on his elite fighting force. He gave this man honors. Yeah. He essentially gave him the Israelite equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he still had the gall to go and do this.
Right.
Furthermore, if you read a little bit further in the life of David, you see he was a terrible father. At some point, one of his sons actually rapes one of his daughters, and David doesn't do a thing about it. This is the story of Tamar, and you can Tamar, and you can go back and read that on your own. How can this guy, this bad dude, who's done things that most of us couldn't even conceive, be given such a place of honor in the Bible? He's called a man after God's own heart, an honor that to my knowledge, was not given to anybody else in the Bible.
Right.
There's so much space in the Bible that's written about him. So why can he be called a man after God's own heart? And that, brothers and sisters, is what I want to talk to you about the rest of this weekend, the rest of this evening. Why was David considered a man after God's own heart? What did he do to deserve this honor? As I said earlier, there's a lot of pages in the Bible spent talking about him, so that means there's probably something that we should learn from him.
Right.
There's something that the authors of the Bible, that God thinks we should really get out of this man's life. If he, out of thousands of years of human beings going through and in and out of his covenant, if he picks this one guy and he really focuses on him so much, that means there's got to be something there, something that maybe we're just missing when we look at the surface.
Right.
There's something there that we got to learn. So, you know where I'm going this evening. The title of my lesson is to be a man after God's own heart. 3 points for you, and I'll let you go. First point, I think we can learn from David, is you've got to be kind to everyone, even your enemies. You got to do what's right in spite of the circumstances.
Right.
Let me take you to another part in David's life, back before he becomes king. See, there was quite a bit of David's life where he wasn't quite in charge. This is between him becoming a shepherd boy, but before he became the king of Judah and Israel. If we go over to 1 Samuel chapter 8, if you go over to 1 Samuel, you read through the story of David. Let me set this up a little bit. Well, first of all, let's turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 24. I'm going to read something there. But while we're turning over there, let me set up the story a little bit. At this point in David's life, one of the first big things that happens to him, he gets anointed by Samuel, right? Saul is messed up. He's been arrogant, and he didn't listen to God. He didn't kill all of the Agag and all of his people like God told him to. He kept back some of the best for himself. So because of his disobedience, God said he was going to take away the kingdom from him. So at that point, Samuel was sent off later on to go anoint somebody from the house of Jesse. And David is chosen by God out of all the sons of Jesse. Samuel anoints him and tells him that, you're chosen by God. You're going to be king one day, essentially. Well, not too long after that, we have the story of Goliath, and you all know what happens there. David goes out to take some food to his older brothers who are fighting Israel's army, and this gigantic Philistines out there taunting and cursing God and saying, one of you guys, just come forward. I'm a Philistine. Let's have a head-to-head match. Your hero versus me. And whoever wins, if you win, we'll become your servants. If we win, you become our servants. And just cut off all this bloodshed and just have a one-to-one battle. Of course he wants to do that. He's the giant. And all the Israelites sit there and listen, and they're quaking in their boots. They're not doing anything. They're listening to this man taunt God, and they're not doing a thing. David comes up, and as we all know, he takes the sling with simply a bag of rocks and a sling, and he goes and he kills this giant man. And soon after that, Saul says, maybe I ought to enlist this man in my services. He apparently knows what he's doing. Yeah. So soon after, David starts doing a lot of work for Saul. Not only does he play the harp for him, but he also goes through and he leads many missions out and is quite successful as a warrior in Saul's army. As he goes through there, he becomes very, very successful, so much so that Saul actually starts to get jealous of him.
Right.
As we go through 1 Samuel, you see a couple things. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, Saul actually tries to pin David to the wall with a javelin twice. Doesn't that say something about a man if he comes back after the first almost pinning? He tries to pin him to the wall twice, directly kill the man while he's sitting in his courts. Well, that doesn't work. David's able to escape. Or maybe Saul's just a bad shot. Either way, soon after that, if Saul says, you know what, if I can't kill him directly, I'll see if I can't get some of the enemies to kill him. So he sends him out on some forays against the Philistines, on 2 essential suicide missions. Both times on the pretense of, hey, if you just kill enough of these guys, if you do all these missions for me, I'll give you my daughter, and you can become the son-in-law of the king, which is a pretty big deal, right? But he was hoping he would die before he got that chance. Twice Saul does this, tries to get him killed. That doesn't work. Indirectly killing him doesn't work. So he goes back to his original plan, and he actually commands all of his own Israelites, all of his own captains, to go kill David. David has to flee through a window and climb out the window, and his wife puts a sack of something in the bed, and when the guys come in there to kill him, they figure out that David escaped. So David escapes, and he's running away. He's on the run for who knows how long. And as you go through 1 Samuel, you see it just keeps getting worse and worse. Some people come to join him, but he's a fugitive. He's running from place to place, town to town. He'll save one town because God sent him over there, and then guess what? They turn around and they try to turn him into Saul. He's betrayed repeatedly. He's always running from Saul because Saul is taking his army now to go pursue the man. At every single chance he gets, Saul is trying to kill David with everything he's got, and David just keeps running away. This goes on for who knows how long. I kind of get the impression that this is probably years. As you read through there, there's not, as best I can tell, there's not exactly a time period that's set there. Then we come down to 1 Samuel chapter 24. Sorry, pardon me, doing it again. Yeah, 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 1 through 19. And it reads, After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands, for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, My lord the king! Saul looked behind him, and David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, Why do you listen when men say, David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I would not lift my hand against my master because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at the piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off a corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, Is that your voice, David, my son? And he wept aloud. You are more righteous than I, he said. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. Guys, that's powerful. This man is a man who has been trying to kill him unceasingly for who knows how long, has pursued him and his men to the ends of the earth, essentially, has tried to pin him directly to the wall several times, told his captains, David's fellow employees, you could look at it almost as, to go kill the man. And yet, when David's given the opportunity to take a little bit of revenge, he doesn't. He lets it go. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And look at the way he treats him too. His men are urging him, just kill him. This is the guy we've been running for so long. You've got a chance. Now do it. But he doesn't. Why? Because he knows that that wouldn't be right. Because this is God's appointed. This is the man that God chose to lead our country. This is the man that God chose. I'm not going to do the rebellion that he's accusing me of.
Right.
Let God deal with him. That level of forgiveness is something that's very impressive. How many times do we look around in our own lives and say, this isn't fair. This is not fair. I'm not being treated right. I deserve better.
Yeah.
You should treat me better. And because you don't, I'm going to pay you back at least a little bit for some of the stuff you do.
Yeah.
And look at the way David does this. He lets it completely go. He could have had his men take Saul back in the cave and say, I'm going to spare your life, but I'm not going to spare 3 of your fingers, or something along those lines. He could have taken a little bit of revenge. He doesn't even do that. He holds it all back.
Yeah.
And furthermore, when he does get a chance, he doesn't stop there. He doesn't say, okay, I'm going to let him go. He goes out and he talks to him. He's conscience-stricken about cutting off a piece of his robe, for heaven's sake. He goes out and he talks to him and says, look, why are you doing this to me? Look at what I had a chance to do to you. And he calls Saul out for some of the things he's doing. He's saying, look, please stop doing this. It's wrong. What you are doing is wrong. He's trying to help Saul. Putting his own life at stake. He goes out there to talk to this man who's been trying to kill him. Right out in front of all 3,000 men that were sent to pursue him. What do you think was going to happen? That Saul was just going to give up and not say, oh, shoot him. No. He goes out and he talks to him. He says, Saul, look at what you're doing. You're wrong. And then look what Saul says. Saul responds in verse 16, he says, and he wept aloud. Verse 17 says, you are more righteous than I said. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did to me, but the Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds an enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. That's power. When an enemy can say nothing to you except that may the Lord treat you well for what you have done for me today. If they can't help but sit there and shake their heads in simple wonder at the things you've done, I think you've done a pretty good job.
Yep.
When your enemies have nothing bad to say about you and can only say good, and you have that sort of an impact on them, I would say you're definitely shining the sort of light that Christ wants us to. So, once again, point number 1, be kind to all, even to your enemies. Do what's right in spite of the circumstances that are around you. It's one of the ways that I think David has exemplified what it means to be a man after God's own heart. So let's go on to the second point. The second point is be humble. When you're wrong, admit it. Let's go over to 2 Samuel chapter 11. So speaking of David's foray with Bathsheba, we come to this point. Now, why am I bringing you here? So, although this is one of the lowest points in David's life, it's also one of the highest. What he does is wrong, but the way he responds is pretty amazing. So let's spend a little bit of time over here. So again, you know the story of Bathsheba. I just set it up for you. So we're going to start off in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 26. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So starting off in chapter 12, we're going to go through verse 13. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, and because he did such a thing and had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if this had all been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to the one who is close to you. He will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did this in secret, but I will do this in broad daylight before all Israel. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die. So a couple things I want to point out here. This is a pretty powerful story. Wouldn't you love to be that prophet? The king of your nation has just very secretly done something and has already killed one man to cover it up. Now God has told you to go tell him he's wrong. Something tells me that Nathan wasn't entirely pleased when he was given this assignment. And so I have to commend Nathan for having the guts to go through with it, because most people would probably pull a Jonah and try to run to the farthest away country that they can to get out of there and not do that. Maybe send David a postcard telling him he's wrong, but only while you're on the ship halfway across the ocean. So that's the first thing. Second, I want you to look at the way David responds non-verbally when Nathan's telling him he's wrong. So look at what Nathan does over here in chapter 12. In verses first off, he starts off with a story, talking about a little ewe lamb and this rich man who he didn't take one of his 100 sheep or so. Instead, he goes over and steals the one sheep that this one poor guy's got and cooks it up. David, in this parable, and David gets mad and says, that shouldn't happen, that's wrong, that's not fair. To which Nathan immediately responds, that's you. Nathan then goes on for the next, from about verse 7 through about verse 12 to absolutely lambaste David. I mean, he throws the kitchen sink at him. A couple things here. He drags his dirty laundry out into public. Something tells me, again, we're not told exactly here, but something tells me that David's probably not sitting in his private room somewhere. He's probably in the court with a bunch of people standing around. Especially if Nathan's coming to him with what seems like a case, a sort of court case that a king would decide. So there's probably a lot of people listening here, and something tells me that Nathan's not whispering very quietly to the King David. I kind of get the impression as I read this translation, again, I don't know, but that Nathan's probably shouting at him. I could be wrong, but that's kind of my interpretation of the way he's phrasing things here. He goes on and just repeatedly, he doesn't softball this. He doesn't make it nice and say, well, David, I kind of think you did this thing wrong. No, he absolutely brute force just slaps him right there and tells him he is wrong, and he's wrong because of what? This is why. And what's very interesting here, what does David say while this is going on? This is not just a single outburst. He didn't just say, that's you, and stop there. No, this seems like it's a pretty extensive little speech that Nathan gives to him and tells him a little lecture that he's given to him and tells him he's wrong. David doesn't interrupt him, which is interesting because David's the king. How many of us, when somebody gets up in our face and is telling us how we're wrong, whether we're wrong or not, the immediate response is to start shouting back. Without even thinking, that's the immediate thing you do. David doesn't, which is pretty impressive, particularly because he is a king. He is a man in high authority. He has probably got a very large view of himself, a large public persona that he's trying to protect. Hey, that's why he had a guy killed, to cover his own mistake. He's trying to protect his public persona. And yet, he doesn't do that here. He listens to Nathan tell him, lecture him like a little kid when he's the king of this whole nation. So that's first. He controls himself very well right here. And then you also see how he responds verbally. What does he say? Does he get defensive? Does he say, no, that's not exactly how it was? Well, I mean, you understand, she was the one that was on the roof. I just kind of walked out there. And then, what happens if we're in the middle of a war? What happens if I go through some sort of scandal? That would be terrible for the country. But we'll deal with this later. This is for the better. He didn't try to be defensive at all. He simply says in verse 13, I have sinned against the Lord. So let's review real quick. Nathan is just publicly, essentially lectured him like a little school child and told him exactly how he was wrong, and he didn't softball at all in front of who knows how many high-ranking officials that were probably involved in the cover-up. And David sits there, quietly takes it, and then he simply says, I was wrong. And I kind of get the impression the way it's written here, again, this is me interpreting, but it seems like that's the first thing he popped off with. He didn't sit there and... It just seems like he took it in and he said, yeah, I was wrong. And he leaves it there. I think that's what happened, because if you look in the latter part of the verse, and it says, Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die. He was very contrite. So took this extremely humbly. Everybody does wrong, even the king. And if we can all learn somehow to respond in that way when we are wrong, not try to cover it up, not try to ignore it, not try to be defensive, not try to make ourselves look better, not worry about all those other things, not be an ostrich and stick our heads in the sand, but instead to simply accept it and say, yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
And what can I do to make it better? That is an extremely powerful trait, and I've been around a lot of people in my life, and I haven't seen that too many terribly times.
Yeah.
Many times whenever I'm trying to figure out a way to go tell somebody at work that they're wrong, I have to go through this whole spiel of what's the easiest way to softball this? How can I set it up? How can I phrase things to keep from making them light off and go off crazy? Instead, kind of suggest that they fix this thing, and really work politically really hard to try to find a way to tactfully convince them that they're wrong without making them look bad.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen at all here. David is told very bluntly, very brute forcefully that he is straight up wrong, and he responds appropriately. I want to work for a guy like that.
Yeah.
That's a very impressive trait that will help us greatly in our own personal lives. And I think that's one of the reasons that God looks so favorably upon him. Because there's not too terribly many people in this world that are going to be humble enough to when they're the king of an entire nation to take a lecture like that from a nobody and respond appropriately. So the third point is also a part of this story. 2 Samuel chapter 12, starting in verse 13, and we're going to move on from there, this time through verse 23. Third point is, be determined and tough. What do I mean by that? We'll start off in verse 13 and see how David deals with this. There's a little bit more that goes on here. Verse 13, then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt, the son born to you will die. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and went to his house and spent nights lying on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, we spoke to David, but he would not listen to us. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his servants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. Then David got up from the ground. After he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes, he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child is dead, you get up and eat? He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. So let's look at how David responded to this. First off, it was very obvious from the way he responded to Nathan that he knew he had messed up, and he felt terrible about it. I know I've done it several times in my life where I've said something and wished immediately I could take it back. And I kind of get the feeling that that's how David responded here. It just set like a rock in the bottom of his stomach when Nathan told him straight up what he'd done wrong. And worse, somebody that he loved was getting hurt because of it. The child that he and Bathsheba had was going to be struck ill, and Nathan told him he was going to die. That makes it even worse when you know that somebody's been hurt because you have messed up and you completely own up to that. That's just a draining, paralyzing feeling. Many people go mad with sorrow at that point. They start blaming other folks. They start pointing the finger everywhere they can. They just shout with grief and they do terrible things. They would get Nathan and just beat him because they knew what terrible things he'd done. He said, no, punish me, don't hurt the child. They would curse God and wonder why he's doing such a thing. But that's not what David does. He turns to the very one who's causing this calamity to come on him. He turns to God, and he sits there, and he lets the affairs of the state go by. He stops taking care of himself. It's for 7 days. He sits there and fasts. And his servants can't get him to eat or drink. He doesn't take care of himself. He's not dealing with any of the issues. He's got a war going on right now. He's not dealing with that. He puts it all aside, and he tries to make amends with God for the mistake that he's made and plead for mercy for this innocent little child. For 7 days he does this. So he has his priorities right. He realizes that despite all the things he's done wrong, God's still the one in control, and God's still the one that can help here. So he focuses that pain and that sorrow in the proper place. He holds down whatever anguish he's going through and does the right thing. That's pretty tough. Furthermore, look at his response whenever the child finally does die. What does he do? He gets up, he cleans himself up, and he starts going about life as normal. And this really confuses the servants. If you look over here at verse 21, his servants asked him, "Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat?" This guy has been mourning terribly while he's afraid that this child would die. Look at how much he did when he was just afraid that the kid was dead. Shouldn't he mourn even more once the child is dead? That's not his response. Let's look at how David responds to that sort of thinking. He says in verse 22, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." See, David realizes here that it's already over there. That fight's over. If he sits down and wallows in self-pity and screams in grief and does all these things that he's feeling on the inside, it's not going to help anybody. He's not doing any good. He was a self-sacrificing guy for those 7 days when that child was in pain and sick and still alive, and there was still a chance. He did whatever he could to help there. But once that was passed, he can't look back. He's just got to keep pressing forward. How tough is that? He's hurting on the inside. He's dying. I know if I had done something, anything, even just said a word to hurt somebody else, and you're afraid that maybe they're going to get hurt. Oh, I really hope nothing bad happens. I hope nothing worse comes of it. Oh. And then it happens. How is your response to go, well, I tried. Let's keep on moving? No. It's usually to wallow in it. You see that in sports figures too. How many times is a guy on the field and he's not hitting shots. He's doing some stupid stuff. He misses an extra point opportunity or something. It puts the team behind. How many times does that just shake their confidence? And the sportscasters go, "Oh, whoa, look, let's see if he can recover from that, or if that's going to keep haunting him." It happens in our own lives too. It's so easy to get caught up in the affairs. You've done something terrible. You've made a mistake, and you're like, "Oh, why could I do? Oh no, I can't believe I did that," and you forget to keep living. David here realizes that it's not appropriate for him to mourn anymore. He's put the affairs of the state aside long enough. He needs to go help people now. He's got to man up, toughen up, and do what's right, even though he's probably dying on the inside. That sort of desire to do what's right, despite what sort of pain is going through you, is an extremely impressive quality. That's toughness right there. He would probably rather get a spear stuck in his side and be told to drag himself across a burning field of coals. But instead, that emotional pain, he was able to suppress it long enough to do what he knows is right and help other people. That's the words simply don't describe it. Every time I read this story, guys, I'm going to be honest with you, I get chills. Because I know if I was in that place, I couldn't be that tough. So, in review, I think the three things that really caused so much to be written about David, it wasn't necessarily that he always did what was right. Despite doing this these terrible things that he did, being a terrible father, being a murderer, doing these things that most of us wouldn't even think about, he was still able to be considered a man after God's own heart. Not necessarily because of the way he acted, though that to a large extent was, but a lot of times it was the way he reacted. All of us mess up. All of us do terrible things. Most of us have never done this. Most of us have not slept with our best friend's wife and then gone and killed the guy to cover it up. Most of us have not been such a terrible parent that when one child hurts another in a horrendous way, unthinkable way, that we do nothing. Yet that's exactly what David did. And despite that, he was still able to be considered a man highly regarded by God. So much so that he was the gold standard for kings to come. And I would argue, and think of how many people that lived during the time of David, before him and after him, all the way through the time of Jesus, and through thousands of years. And yet not one of them deserved as much time in the Bible as David did. What does that say about the man? God thought a lot about this guy. He really, really, really respected and honored David above many, many other people. And I think the reason he did it is because of David's heart, of the way he reacted to these situations. Because he had some very low points, but the man was something pretty amazing. He bounced back from these things like nothing I've ever seen before. And he did some things that most of us could barely even conceive of doing in his own personal life. It wasn't just because he was a king. It was because he was a good man. And that's something that's very impressive. It's both encouraging and impressive to know that one can do such terrible things and still be considered highly favored by God. I think that's something that's we have to remember in our own lives, both as Christians and also as we go out and try to reach to others. You know that as low as you get, you can always come back up. There's always some place to come. Because God doesn't necessarily have a checklist, a balancing act that he does where it's, okay, how many good things have you done and how many bad things have you done? No, he looks at the heart. And that's something that can be changed in an instant. You can fix it at any point. And that, I'd like to offer this evening's invitation. It's an invitation that we offer at the end of every service because we think it's that important. It's an invitation for several things. First off, it's an invitation to become a child of God. We talk about many things that it takes to be a man after God's own heart. Well, Matthew 7:21 says, it's not those who say, Lord, Lord, that will enter the kingdom of heaven, but it's those who do the will of my Father that's in heaven. So in order to become one of God's children, to start having that heart, to start becoming a man or woman after God's own heart, you have to do a couple things. You have to obey him. That involves believing him, and believing that the Bible is the Word of God and that Jesus is the Son of God. It also involves believing it so much that you look at the things that you're doing in your life that are wrong and you repent of those things. And repent doesn't just mean that you've realized and acknowledged that they're wrong, but you are so convicted that you wish to change them. Much as David did whenever he was told that he had messed up really badly whenever he had done those things with Uriah and Bathsheba. To believe it so much that it changes your life. That's what's called repentance. And once you make that commitment, then God tells us to seal it with baptism. You perform this first act to display publicly your commitment to become a Christian, to live after him, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to live up to that commitment that you make. It's not something that you get perfect and then come to God. It's you come to God to make you perfect, to become that man after God's own heart, because you're never actually going to reach there. It's more of a journey. It's not a goal. Many of these verses I didn't quote, but if you have questions about those things, we can always talk to you afterwards. So the invitation is both an invitation to become a Christian, and many times, after you become a Christian, you do wrong things, much as David did. You have low points in your life where you mess up. So this invitation is also those who have become Christians, who have fallen away, who have done some things that are wrong, who feel that they need to confess some sins to the other Christians here, so we can pray for you and with you and help you in any way we can. So this invitation, in a few short moments, we're going to stand and sing the song of invitation. And this invitation extends to you. If you feel that you need to become a Christian, if you feel that you need to confess some sins, or if you simply wish to ask for prayers of the church, please let it be made known by simply remaining standing after this song. So with that, John, will you lead us in the song? Well, it's good to be able to have a chance to stand before you this evening. I appreciate Brother Antonio for letting me get up here, and Brother Lundy for stepping aside for a little bit. Let me try my hand at this. It's a good jumping off point, right? To be able to sit down with some good friends that I know and love, and be able to practice what I think I will probably need to do at some point someday. So, all of us, I'm going to talk about something that we all mostly know about. You ever heard of a guy named David?
Yeah.
So we all know about David, mostly because, he's the man after God's own heart. The Bible speaks more about David than it does almost any other man in the Bible, save probably Jesus, in terms of pages in the Bible. You hear a whole lot about David's life. And in fact, it even says that he went fully after God. He's called a man after God's own heart, like I said, in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 14. And then a little later on, David's always the one that God compares kings to. He's the gold standard. In fact, at some point it says in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse about 12, it said that even when Solomon messed up, Solomon was doing bad, God says, because of what you're doing,